sound all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And thank you for taking part of your Saturday to do a little time traveling in Hueneme. And welcome to Market Street. Port Hueneme is the second oldest town in Ventura County. It was actually started before Ventura County was a county. And it has had boom times, which it enjoyed, and it has had bust times, which it survived. Now, one way to learn about some of the history of Hueneme is to track what happened on Market Street. That was the main street downtown. During prosperous times, it was crowded with people. They were going back and forth. There were lots of wagons and horses, and there was businesses up and down both sides of the street. During lean times, you could shoot a cannon down Market Street and not hit a soul. So there was a real difference with some of the times. Now, this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about Hueneme history, about Market Street, and some of the people and the businesses that were the heart of the downtown area. But first, a word about the name. There we go. Yes. Port Hueneme gets the prize for having the most name changes of any town in Ventura County. And you can see, let me get back so you can see. Started out with a shumash, they called it Hueneme, and that meant resting place because it was about halfway between Magoo Lagoon and Santa Clara River, and also between Malibu and Santa Barbara. It's also the closest place to Anacapa Island, only 11 miles, and so it was a jumping off point for shumash who wanted to take their tomos, their canoes, out to the islands. Now, when that name was anglicized by W.E. Bernard in around 1870 to Hueneme, and he was either a settler or a squatter, depending on your viewpoint, and he wanted to take over the land here in this area. Thomas Bard, who came on the scene in the 1860s, had other ideas. He had moved out here from Pennsylvania. He was buying up land that came open when the Mexican ranchos were breaking up, and he was working for his partner, developer Thomas Scott. So there was a conflict between the two men, and you can read Al Greenland's book to get a lot of details about that. But Thomas Bard won out, and he platted the town of Hueneme, changing the name, in 1872. Then, so it was Hueneme for a long time, and then in 1940, when the harbor was opened, the name changed again to Port Hueneme, and that's what it is today. Now, there's always been conflict about how do you pronounce that name. And even back, I found a letter to the editor in the 1880s, and the writer is castigating the editor saying, "You did not pronounce the name right. It is supposed to be we name me." And my husband went to Hueneme High School, and he was in the marching band. So when they would be at away games, the announcer would announce the name and invariably just butcher it. "Welcome to the marching band from Port Hueneme." So if anybody calls it Hueneme, they probably are an old timer, or what we call euphemistically a long-time resident. Now, I want to show you this because it's important to the beginning of the town and how it was laid out. In 1855, there was a U.S. coastal survey done, and they gathered wonderful information, detailed information about this whole coastline. They found that there was a deep under submarine canyon right off Point Hueneme that was about 1,200 feet deep. Later, Thomas Bard knew about that, and he decided that was a perfect place to build a wharf. So you can see the my handy little. Here's the salt flats, and here's where the Deepwater Canyon is, and this is Point Hueneme. So this was very important to the origins of the town. This is a plat map from 1888, and it is almost identical to what was filed originally by Thomas Bard. And you can see it's kind of an odd configuration for a town. There's like a diamond in the middle. And Bard picked names from, some of the names from his childhood back in Pennsylvania. He also named Scott Street for his partner, Thomas Scott, and Clara Street for his sister-in-law, Clara. So one interesting thing about this, and I don't know the answer yet, maybe someone does, if you look up where it says Hueneme Street, and then later maps, right there, later maps showed it both ways, Pomona Street and Hueneme Street. So might look at the street sign out there and see what it actually says nowadays. The wharf is down here, and this was all laid out by 1872, and this area started to grow. In 1871, Thomas Bard had the wharf built, and what was happening in Ventura County is that agriculture was becoming a real powerhouse. And so the first crops they were growing was grain, all kinds of grain, wheat, corn, barley. Once they had a wharf, that opened up markets down to Los Angeles, up to San Francisco, and farther north. And so farmers would come down from the Conejo. They would come down what was called the Long Grade, which was Potrero Road. And if you know what it's like today, you can imagine what it was like back in the 1870s. They would also come from Simi Valley. It was a 3-day trip. So they would load all the grain in big bags, pile them in big wagons, harness up 8 to 10 horses, and make the trip to Hueneme. So Hueneme became a very bustling place. I love this photograph. This is taken from a glass plate negative. There is so much detail. It's clean. It's kind of hard on a screen to see all the detail, but this is catnip to a history buff because you can see so many things. And this is Market Street, downtown Hueneme. It's very busy. There were all kinds of businesses, grocery stores, dry goods, butcher. There was several saloons. Imagine that. And so all these farmers would bring their crops down to Hueneme. They'd be put in a warehouse and then loaded on the ships to go to various places. So for the first, up until about 1900, Hueneme was a very busy place. And let me see. I can't see it in this one. Well, go on. This was one of the businesses in town, Wolf and Lehman. This is not snow. This is unfortunately a photograph that has been damaged. But it's interesting just to see how prosperous the businesses were. They were building a lot up and down Market Street. Unfortunately, in 1894, there was a fire downtown, started on Market Street, and started in one of the general stores, reached the kerosene cans, and that was all she wrote. It burned down a good part of the business district. They bounced back and rebuilt, and this is the new Wolf and Lehman store, and they decided to go with brick this time, not quite as easy to burn, and the downtown bounced back. Everything looked good until the Oxnard brothers arrived in Ventura County, decided to build a sugar beet factory, and didn't do it in Hueneme. Did it out on the plains, back inland, someplace called Oxnard. And so a lot of the businesses that were on Market Street in Hueneme saw opportunity over the fields, and they picked up their businesses and their houses, lock, stock, and barrel, and moved them to Oxnard. And so by the early 1900s, Hueneme looked a lot different. So many of the businesses had moved. This is a Sanborn map from 1910. Now, Sanborn was a fire insurance company. They went all over the United States doing detailed maps that are loved by historians because they have so much information on them. Sanborn was interested in what was flammable and what was not. And so they had went up and down the streets. They would identify what the different businesses were a lot of times. And so they have a wealth of information about any community that they covered. So you can see here a couple of things. It's a pretty quiet town, but there's still things going on. So here's the Hueneme Hotel. Over here is the Bard building, and it says in the back, no scenery. It's a stage, but no scenery. So they used it for community gatherings and productions. We have general merchandise and billiards, pool room, all the important stuff, meat market. But you can see that a lot of all these are vacant all along here because most of those businesses were in Oxnard. Now, if you look up where it says feed up here, I'll just show you the, oops, okay, good. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Oh, did it go? I think I hit the wrong button. Did it go to sleep? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, good. So here you're picking up what you saw in the last slide, and this is the top end of Market Street, and this is where we are. There wasn't anything built there yet in 1910. And here is another public hall that you can see, a two-story hall that you can see in some of the photographs. This was the AOUW. Does anybody here know what that stood for?
It was a union. Yeah, I can't remember what all the stuff was. That's also where the library is.
It was the Ancient Order of United Workers. And to stop and think what that was for. And so that was where they met. And you said the library was there also. Okay.
The first library.
The first library. All right. So this was what Hueneme looked like in 1910. And it went into kind of I think what Howard Greenland called a long sleep for about 30 years. And this is Market Street in around the 1920s. So you can see not a whole lot going on. However, people were still coming here. This was still a land of opportunity, a place for people to make a living. And people were moving in, finding a livelihood, opening up a business, raising a family. And I'd like to tell you about one family that I know quite a bit about, thanks to a few relatives. And this family is an example of a lot of families that came here and had the same kind of experiences. Oh. There we go. This is Bernard and Marie Arstegi. Bernard was a Basque who came over here around 1900 with his father, who worked here, then went back to France for a while, ended up serving in World War I. He was a translator for the U.S. Army during the war. He was wounded and gassed, and while he was recuperating in the hospital in France, he met this beautiful nurse named Marie. And so he got U.S. citizenship, came back, and in 1919, he and Marie both landed in Hueneme, got married at Santa Clara Church in Oxnard, and were living here. A few years later, they were able to save enough money to buy a grocery store on Market Street, the Arstegi Market. And Arstegi is a Basque word, and Bernard and Marie moved here, and a number of other Basques moved to the area too, and also in Santa Paula. So here's Marie. She's sitting on a bread box next to the store on Market Street, and she's holding Helen. Helen was born in 1925. Helen, hold up your hand. Helen lived here all of her life. Eventually married a handsome young man from the Navy named Bob Brant. Raised 5 kids here, and until recently lived here. Just recently moved to Ventura, and we're thrilled about that. But if you have any questions about old-time Hueneme, Helen's your person. At least one of them. There's a lot of good historians in the area. So here's Marie and Helen. They eventually had 2 more children. And I want you to notice that box that she's sitting on. Early in the morning, the baker would deliver the freshly baked bread, put it in the box because it was before the store opened. And so then they would give it later on. Well, this bread box, or one like it, ended up helping out with a story that turned into a legend called Bread Box George. And this is not a very good picture, but it's what we have. George moved to Hueneme in like 1915 maybe, had a lot of odd jobs around town, and finally he sort of retired to the top of the bread box. And he would sit there day in and day out, rolling his own cigarettes and just watching the world go by. Well, the bread box slanted down, and if George nodded off, he would start to fall off the bread box. So some bright soul had the idea to turn the bread box around so it slanted back towards the wall like this, and it wedged George into his place. Now, Bill Miranda, who was a longtime resident, said that George had a, you can see he's got a cane there. He had a rubber tip on his cane, and he used to sit there and squash ants that went by with his cane. He is right next to the Arstegi Market, and he had a little shack right next to the market. Unfortunately, I think it was in 1940, there was a fire in the shack, and he died of smoke inhalation. However, his memory lives on. He will not be forgotten. he was in his 70s. I think he was like 72, early 70s, just a youngster. Yeah, so Red Box George, he was one of the town characters. Now another character who came into town frequently
There he is.
was Frenchie. Frenchie was a fisherman who lived out on Anacapa Island in a little shack. He had 4 or 5 cats out there, and he would fish and catch lobster, and then hitch a ride on a boat into Hueneme, come into the Arstegi market, and trade his lobster and fish for essentials like a bottle of jug wine and even some food. And then he'd catch a ride back out to the islands and go about his business. So Frenchie's Cove on Anacapa Island was named for this character. Now, I don't know if anybody knows, I think he had an injury, I think he broke his leg, and I think he was taken to Santa Barbara and died there. Does that sound right?
It's a convalescent home, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So we know what happened to Frenchie. But his memory lives on also. You can't forget Frenchie. Now, here is another Sanborn map from 1929, and it shows a lot of changes. And these are gold because Sanborn was very accurate. They were very careful about what they put in because the fire department needed all this information and they needed it for their insurance policies. So they're wonderful if you're trying to get some solid information on something. So we have a hotel here. The Hueneme Hotel is moved over here. We have general merchandise, bakery, just all kinds of things. Here is the Arstegi store, right there on the corner. Pool hall, of course, is very necessary. And once again, this is Market Street going up here. And here it continues. And here we are. That was the bank building that was built, I think in 1925. Hueneme Bank Building. One interesting thing that I noticed, this is an artesian well. So I don't know what happened to it, but it was right back there. Of course, there were the water level on this area was very high for a long time until the sugar beet factory came. And they used a lot of water to process their sugar beets. So the water table started going down. And eventually that's what caused a lot of the seawater intrusion into this area. And for the ag industry, that's always been a consideration because crops don't like salt water. So if you are ever doing any kind of research, the Sanborn maps are a great resource. Oh, I wonder, that one. Let's see, this was the red and white Dewar's grocery store, and the post office was in the back. So, yeah. And you can see that Hueneme has filled in again. There's a lot more businesses. This is like a little village now, and Helen remembers it had, sounds like a great place to grow up, and it had what you needed. You know, they had grocery stores and dry goods store and barber and just a lot of different services. And bonus, there were 2 places in town that had cement sidewalks. One in front of the Arstegi store and another little patch in front of this building. And so the kids would get their clip-on skates, do you remember those, anybody? Yeah. And go practice their skills on the little bits of cement that were in town at the time. And here is a photograph of Market Street in the 1930s. And you can see it's a busy place. looks a lot different than it did 10 or 15 years earlier. There are lots of people, there are shops, there was pretty much what you needed here. Our Steggy store is there, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's the corner of the Arstegi, where the Arstegi store was.
And the white building just beyond it is the Bard.
Offices, yes.
That one.
Bard had offices there, yes. And I think you can see Bread Box George right about there. Now, now we get into a different part of the history. Thomas Bard, his son, Richard Bard, took over the development business when Thomas died. And from the 1920s, he wanted to have a harbor here at Hueneme. And it turned out not to be a very easy project to bring forth. Powell Greenland has a great book about all the things that he went through, all the obstacles he went through to get a harbor here. But finally, 1939, 1940, the harbor opened. And what a proud moment that was for Bard and all the businessmen and citizens who worked together to make that happen. It was doing just great, and then guess what happened? December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. And shortly thereafter, the Navy came in and said, great, we need this harbor. So imagine how they felt. On one hand, it's like, we just got going, you're taking our harbor. And on the other hand, it was turnkey operation for the war effort. So it was a kind of a mixed bag of emotions, I'm sure. So Hueneme was one of the busiest harbors during World War II, shipping things to the Pacific Theater. And the CB base came in, the Navy took over the CB base, they brought in a lot of people, and of course housing was at a premium. I was reading that they were living in converted chicken houses and old abandoned buses and everywhere they could find a place to live. So that was a big influx of people into this area. And we ended up with some card rooms opening up to take care of their spare time and their spare money. Now the Silver Dollar right here, that's an interesting building because it was the first Hueneme bank. And then the harbor district, harbor offices were in there. And last of all, it was home to the Silver Dollar. And anybody who lived here in the 50s, you say Silver Dollar and they all roll their eyes. Oh yeah. Of course, kids were not allowed anywhere near this part of this block with all these card clubs, because who knows what went on in the dark recesses of those rooms. And Helen told me the story of when she was a kid, she saw one of the owners of one of these card clubs, and she was surprised to see how normal he looked. He didn't have horns, he didn't have a tail, he just looked like an ordinary guy. So that has really stuck in her mind. Now,
Betty and Isabel Ramirez, you know, they mentioned that their aunt was the owner of the Silver Dollar.
okay.
They would never admit it. Yeah.
Not in polite
We have a
terms.
picture of her aunt.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Good.
I had my first legal drink at the Silver Dollar.
Your first legal drink at the Silver Dollar. All right. We'll remember that. I had to put these in because this was such an odd happening in Hueneme. And I'll never forget the date because I have a husband who was one of the few people in Ventura County who was born during a snowstorm. January 13th, 1949. He's right back there behind the camera. So it snowed 2 different days in many parts of Ventura County, and for sure in Hueneme and on Market Street. And so this is Bob's City Market truck. Bob and Helen had taken over the market from Marie. And I meant to mention, Barney Bernard, I mentioned, had been gassed during the war, so I think his lungs were weak. And he died in 1935, and he was 47, I think, when he died, from double pneumonia. And Marie had Helen, they had Jean, and Bud, who was less than a year old when Bernard died. And so Marie took over the store, ran the store, and raised the family for years until Bob and Helen took over the store. So this is Bob's City Market truck under there somewhere. And this is Market Street. How about that? A snowball fight on Market Street in Hueneme. And this is the market. Now it's Bob's City Market. And back here, this now is the police station. That became the police station. But you can tell this was 1949 by the scarf she's wearing. You can't see anybody wearing that nowadays. Now, I want to put this back up because what happened in the 50s and 60s meant a lot of changes for Hueneme, Port Hueneme by this time. They weren't doing a very good job of using the beach area. There was a great beach that nobody knew about. There were a lot of substandard buildings in town, and so a couple of things happened in the 60s. The harbor wanted to expand, and so the harbor bought a big chunk of downtown Port Hueneme. Up Market, up Pomona or Enola, whichever, flare up, down. So this whole section went to the harbor district. And it included almost 150 houses, a church, businesses, including Bob's City Market, and that took care of that part of downtown. The next thing was a redevelopment project where they came down and removed some streets and took out a lot of buildings that were down in this area here. Main Street was taken out, and a lot of the buildings along here were just bulldozed down. And then a lot of that just sat, particularly on Market Street. There were just a lot of empty lots. Somebody said they forgot to put the re back into redevelopment. So they didn't build it back up. So what did they get out of that? It was both wins and gains and losses. They gained a lot of new buildings. They gained a much bigger access to the beach area. That was really opened up. And that's a whole nother story about what happened to the sand on the beach, because it kept disappearing. And that's another story about Channel Islands Harbor. But they also lost a lot of history. Some of these buildings were just knocked down with never fairly well. They didn't keep track of what the importance was of those buildings, and Market Street just died as the main downtown street. There were lots of empty lots on Market Street. In fact, there still are. There's the park across the street, but there's no businesses over there. So, and then the other thing they did was they changed the names of some of the streets. So Broad Street became Port Hueneme Road. 4th Street, where are you? 4th Street, here's 4th Street, became Ventura Road. And Oxnard Avenue became Channel Islands Boulevard, I think. Now, you can imagine for someone who has lived there all their life, this was kind of hard to get used to because you don't know where you're at. Everything has changed, even the names of the streets have changed. So it was, I imagine it was pretty unsettling for a lot of the people who had lived here a long time. So there's pluses and minuses. But the, let's see, one thing I think is really important, learning about all this, and I didn't know a lot of these things until I started working on this talk. So it's been fascinating. I think organizations like the Port Hueneme Historical Society Museum are so important to capture what we can of all the past and the people and what they did and how they lived and how they made it look the way it does today and what happened. Because if there aren't groups like that, organizations and all of their volunteers, we lose those stories and we don't know why things are the way they are. So I commend the museum and the organization, and it's been a pleasure learning more about Port Hueneme, and I hope you continue research and read on some of the stories. I'd like to recommend Powell Greenland's 2 books. They're excellent, and he did a lot of research. So that is the end.